Thank you all. I am so excited to be here, and I get to talk to you about one of my favorite things, and that is pollinators in the landscape. So let's dive right in. Tonight we're going to talk about why pollinators are important and a little bit about their biology, because that helps us understand how we can better support them in our landscapes. Then we're going to talk about strategies to build habitat and how to start a water-wise or pollinator garden. So pollinators, why are they important to us? Why should we even care? Well, from an ecosystem perspective, about 3/4, 75% or more of all the plants in our world rely on insects for pollination. Pollination is plant reproduction. So imagine a world without 75% of our plant species. We need our pollinating insects. From a human perspective, about 1/3 of the world's diet is dependent on pollinators. That is our most nutritious part of our diet, our fruits, vegetables, and nuts. But pollinators, like all insects, have a ripple effect in our world. Even our meat and dairy industries are dependent on pollinators because cattle feed on alfalfa and clover, which are pollinated by bees. Pollinators also help a lot of other, or provide a lot of other ecosystem benefits, like stabilizing our soil. If we didn't have pollinators facilitating plant reproduction, we would have a lot more erosion, we wouldn't have stormwater intake. We owe our pollinators a lot. About 80 or so crops are dependent on pollinators, and famous biologist E.O. Wilson estimated that if insects, including pollinators, were wiped out of the planet, humans would only be able to live a few months. They are the, E.O. Wilson also said insects are the little things that run the world. So they are critical to our ecosystem. So what exactly is pollination? And my headlines are small for some reason, so I apologize if that's a little hard to read. What is pollination? Facilitating plant reproduction. A bee, when she visits a flower, she doesn't know she's helping out that plant at all. She wants that pollen and nectar. Pollen is protein for her young. Honey is energy, nectar is energy. So when she visits that flower, she's very attracted to it. It's colorful to her. It has markings saying, come here, land here. There's high rewards here. And in that process, pollen grains are going to be deposited on her body. And then she's going to visit another flower of the same species, and in that process, some of those pollen grains are going to be deposited in the next flower. This could be a whole class in itself, but in summary, that facilitates plant reproduction, and plants have evolved to attract their specific pollinator. So I love this example of the columbines. Each one of those columbines has a different pollinator. Purple columbines attract bumblebees. The red ones that droop down a little bit attract hummingbirds. And the white columbine with the long spurs attract moths that have a long tongue called a proboscis. So I see white-lined sphinx moth a lot on white columbines. I'll show you a picture of them in a minute. Most people are familiar with honeybees. Honeybees are an important economic crop pollinator, but we also have a wide variety of other pollinators that specialize on specific plants. Honeybees cannot do the job. The classic example is bumblebees. So bumblebees do something called buzz pollination, meaning they have a special vibration that when they land on the plant, the pollen is released from that plant. No one else, no other pollinator can do that, can do buzz pollination. They pollinate our tomatoes, our peppers, and blueberries is another example of a plant that needs that buzz pollination. Who here grows pumpkins or squash? Yeah, quite a few. Squash bees are the only pollinators for our pumpkins and our squash plants. And they are out super early in the morning, those big yellow flowers, you'll see buzzing little bees all around. Those are not honeybees, those are squash bees. Squash bees are native to North America. They pollinate our native squash plants, but when you plant squash, they will find them and pollinate your garden squash and pumpkins. And another really cool example that I think is worth mentioning are yucca plants and yucca moths. This relationship is so intricate, one cannot survive without the other. So yucca moths, they have this really special mechanism where she holds the pollen underneath her chin, and she deposits just enough so that yucca plants can reproduce. But she also provides that pollen to her young when those little caterpillars hatch. So very specialized pollinator-plant relationship. We have a wide variety of pollinators in Colorado, in North America, and in our world. So let's run through some of them that you might see in your own landscape. Hummingbirds are our pollinating bird species in Colorado. We have 4 species that you're likely to see. This is a female broad-tailed hummingbird, and you'll see at the top of her head, see those little pollen grains? She was visiting a red, long tubular flower and probably helped pollinate those red flowers. Bees we're going to talk about more in a second. Wasps, believe it or not, we're going to talk more about wasps too. Believe it or not, we have some species of wasps that are pollinators. In this picture here, with those pointy little abdomens, those are a specialized family of wasps called pollen wasps that exclusively feed on pollen and nectar. Most wasps feed on meat, like they feed on other insects, but these guys only feed on pollen and nectar. These are not the wasps that are going to cause problems, while you're eating dinner outside. These wasps keep to themselves. Flies, we have a variety of flower visiting flies. Now, flies is another diverse group, so not all flies are created equal, but our flower visiting flies provide double benefits. Not only are they pollinating flowers, but syrphid fly larvae, like in that picture, that's an adult. The larvae feed on aphids and other soft-bodied insects. Those little larvae, they're great hunters. So we owe our flower visiting flies a lot of credit for ecosystem balance. Butterflies. We have over 250 species of butterflies just here in Colorado alone. We have over 1,000 species of moths. And these are often welcome visitors. And the key to attracting these in our landscape, we'll talk more about this, is finding out what their caterpillar host plant. Each species has a different plant that the caterpillars feed on. So this opens up a world of plants we can add to our landscape to attract those butterflies and moths. Beetles. Beetles are some of our oldest pollinators. You'll often see beetles in the fall, especially with our late blooming flowers. They're feeding on that pollen and nectar, and when they visit flower and plant to plant, they can also transfer pollen. We have a lot of predatory beetles as well that provide pest control in our landscapes. And bats. Bats are pollinators. They also are critical for pest control. Here in Colorado, we have 19 species. They aren't going to pollinate too many plants here, but if you do go a little bit further south, they do pollinate the agave plant, which is what they make tequila out of. So if you enjoy a good margarita, you can, thank your bats for that. Very important pollinators. Now let's talk about bees. I'm going to focus for a few minutes on bee biology because knowing where they live along with our other pollinators tells us how we can better support them. Worldwide, we have over 20,000 species of bees. North America, we have over 4,000. And here in Colorado, this is brand new research, over 1,000 species of bees. Many, hundreds of them you can see in your backyards on a day-to-day basis. The honeybee is only one of those species. The honeybee is a non-native species. We actually brought it over from Europe in the 1600s. Very important for pollinating a lot of our crops, but technically a non-native species. Now, it's important to talk, my slides keep advancing. I'm not quite sure why, so I'm going to keep going back. Honeybees are the truly only eusocial bee that we have. And this is important because when we think about bees, we think about them living in hives, in human-made hive boxes. Honeybee is the only bee that will do that. They share 3 characteristics: overlapping generations, within one hive, reproductive division of labor, meaning there's the queen, she's the only one that lays eggs, and the colony honeybees are very altruistic. It is all about the survival of the colony and not the individual. And then cooperative brood care, meaning once honeybees they're like 9 to 10 days old, they actually tend to the larvae that haven't gone through metamorphosis yet. They tend to those baby bees. So that's the honeybee and only the honeybee. All our other bees are solitary bees. So the bees that you're gonna see in your backyard, those wild bees, are solitary and most live underground or in cavity nests. So right now, those bees are tucked underground. They're just completing metamorphosis. Spring is here. The mason bees have already started emerging. We'll start seeing other species follow behind. Those females and males are going to emerge. And she's going to forage on a variety of flowers for pollen and nectar. So those early season plants are super important, the early blooming plants. She's going to find another place to build a nest, underground or in a cavity. And she's going to pack that pollen and nectar into a tight ball and deposit one egg on it. And then she'll seal up her nest cell, and she'll do it again, again, and again. And this is most of our bee species. Once winter comes, her life will come to an end, and all the males, their lives will come to an end, but all her brood is going to be protected underground for the following season. These bees are not going to bother you. When you're outside, you're not going to get stung, but these are our wild pollinators that need protecting. So 70% of all of our bees nest underground, 30% nest in cavities. A cavity, I had leafcutter bees nest in between my patio stones. They'll find any nook and cranny. It could also be a bee hotel. It might be some hollowed out stems. And also, look at that picture in the middle. Doesn't that look like anthills to you? Yeah, that is those are solitary bee nests. So if you see holes in your garden, I encourage you this summer to pause and look and see who's going in and out of those holes. You might be surprised. Bumblebees have a slightly different life cycle, which is worth mentioning because who leaves the leaves in the fall? Anyone? Few people? Yeah, that's to help our queen bumblebees. They are the most hardy bee out there because queen bumblebees are the only adult bee that hibernates over winter. So they're hibernating, they're waking up any day now. She's gonna forage on pollen and nectar and find a hollowed out space to build her colony. She'll lay generations of worker bees and males, female worker bees, and then mid-season she's gonna lay eggs that are new males and new queens. They will go out and leave the nest, find a mate. Once winter comes, that current colony will come to an end, and the only survivors will be those newly mated queens. And they need those sheltered areas, leaf piles, log piles, places out of the elements where they can hibernate. So here's your pop quiz. Am I a bee, a fly, or a wasp? And this is important because insects are really difficult to identify. Like people spend their whole careers learning how to just identify different flies to species or different bees to species levels. So let's see how you guys do. What's number one, a bee, fly, or wasp? Just shout it out. Excellent. What's number two? Oh, I'm sorry. It was a fly. Yep, number one was a fly. Good job. That was your warm-up question. What's number two? Number two is a fly. Look at those, the sides of the body, the yellow. Solitary bees carry pollen on their hind legs. That fly is mimicking solitary bees. What's number three? Ooh, this is also a fly. This is a syrphid fly. This is one of those that provides pest control in our gardens. What's number four? Number four is also a fly. I promise. I'll tell you why in a minute. Number four is a fly. What's number five? Number five is also a fly. A fly that mimics a bumblebee. What's number six? Number six is a wasp. What's number seven? Number seven is a bee. And what's number eight? Number eight is a bee. Now, number eight is a trick question. Number eight is a cuckoo bee. A cuckoo bee is a parasite bee that parasitizes other wild bees. So she doesn't have to be a pollinator. She doesn't have hair on her body. She visits flower for nectar. She's on some chokecherry flowers there. But she relies on her host bee to do all the pollination and the food gathering for her. So number eight was a trick question. Let's talk about how you can identify flower visitors in your own landscape. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, wasps have long, narrow bodies, no hair, and they do not carry pollen. Flies, 2 things to look for: giant fly eyes that go to the top of their head, and short, stubby antenna. That is your instant giveaway. Flies also have 1 pair of wings versus 2, but that can be kind of hard to see. Flies also don't carry pollen. Bees, on the other hand, are round, robust, and they have a lot of hairs because they're very efficient pollinators, and that's how they carry pollen. You'll see pollen either in pollen baskets called corbiculae, so balls of pollen and nectar packed into a tight ball on their hind legs, or you'll see pollen on special pollen collecting hairs on the underside of their abdomen, maybe their hind legs. All sizes, shapes, and colors though. So let's look at our pop quiz. Those first 5 insect photos, big fly eyes that go to the top of the head and short, stubby antenna. Flies look like bees and wasps because bees and wasps can sting, and if a fly looks like a stinging insect, predators and humans will avoid it. Now, the wasp, long, narrow bodies, and that bee right there, that's a European wool carder bee. Actually a non-native species, but it's everywhere. You see wool carder bees around fuzzy plants. Remember the lamb's ear variety Ross was talking about? Wool carder bees love lamb's ear because the females scrape the fuzz off the plant and she lines her nest with them. So look for that this summer. And then of course our cuckoo bee. This was at the Aurora Waterwise Garden. Which is the bee, which is the fly? The fly is on top, big eyes and short, hardly visible antenna. And you can see the pollen baskets on that honeybee. It's amazing though. I think that photo is absolutely amazing how close they look. Here's some examples of bees you might see in your garden. From a size perspective, that top, let's see, it's my right photo, that little tiny metallic bee is in a bindweed flower, all the way to queen bumblebees that are almost an inch long. So take time, observe your flowers, and see who's coming to your garden. If you want to learn more about bees, this is a free guide that you can download from the CSU Extension website. And I'll have a QR code at the end so you can get that later if you'd like. Now, I mentioned this real quick because this comes up all the time. Beekeeping. Should I be keeping bees to help save the bees? And there's a lot of pros to beekeeping. You get the honey, the wax. They're an important economic crop pollinator, but they're a non-native species. Beekeeping can be very rewarding. It is a ton commitment and costly, but it is very rewarding. But should you keep bees to save the bees? Absolutely not, because honeybees, they're managed species. They're like any livestock species. We breed them, people buy them. A beekeeper, if they lose their bees, they will buy new bees. They will split their current hive. The honeybees are not at risk of extinction versus our wild bees that are at risk of population decline and some species maybe even extinction. So important distinction there. But this is a good time to remind people that swarm season is upon us. If you come across a bee swarm, be sure to look up the swarm hotline. We have a network of beekeepers that want those bees. And these bees, when they swarm, they're so full of honey, they're not gonna sting. They're very docile, they don't have a home protect. So tell people not to panic and call the swarm hotline. All right, safety and stings. When we talk about adding perennials to our landscape, adding pollinator gardens to our landscape, there's a lot of fear around stings. So here's what you need to know. Over 90% of all insect stings are from the western yellow jacket. And the western yellow jacket doesn't visit flowers for nectar. The western yellow jacket is a scavenging insect, normally feeds on carrion or dead things. They also happen to be very attracted to human food sources, but they do not visit pollinator-friendly flowers. Honeybees can sting, they can only sting once. They have a little barb that stays in your skin and it kind of rips out their guts when they sting you and try to fly off. So they do not survive. So stinging is truly the last resort for them. So you really have to provoke a honeybee to get stung. Wasps can sting multiple times. But this is important. Solitary bees and solitary wasps, they don't have a colony to protect. They don't want to sting you. And stings are very rare. Usually that insect has to be pressed up against your skin to get stung. They aren't going to be flying around your picnic, your barbecue, anything like that. Which means planting flowers that attract pollinators is a very low risk for stings. In fact, it's no different than just hanging out in your garden on a normal day. It's the western yellow jackets that are responsible for over 90% of those stings. They are aggressive because they are scavengers and they are always looking for food, and they will protect their nest if they feel that it is threatened. So if you do come across a yellow jacket nest, be very careful. All of our wasp species only live a 1-year life cycle. So most of the time I get calls, it's September, the wasps are really aggressive. They're thinking about hiring a pest control company, which is a great solution, by the way, to remove a nest. But that wasp colony is not going to survive once the cold temperatures arrive. So if you can wait a little bit longer, the wasps will no longer be there. The only survivors are those newly mated queens. The colony does not survive. If you do have yellow jackets and they're a nuisance, your best option is to get pheromone traps, keyword there, pheromone traps, and hang them out now. Because those queen yellow jackets are gonna wake up any day now and they're gonna look for a place to build a new colony. So if you wait till July, man, she already has a couple hundred wasps, working in her colony. Get those pheromone traps out now to catch those new queens. European paper wasps are other nuisance wasp that gets a lot of attention, not because they sting. Usually stings only happen if someone doesn't know the wasp nest is there. They walk into a shed. They build their nest under house eaves or in dark places. This is an invasive species, and this has dramatically altered our caterpillar populations in our gardens. They eat the butterfly caterpillars, the moth caterpillars. They eat all the caterpillars that the birds need to feed on. So this is truly an invasive species. It's everywhere. They do forage on flowers for nectar, but they are a low sting risk unless you get too close to their nest. The yellow traps do not work. We do have a variety of other wasps. Due to time, I'm not going to go into it. If you see these, they look scary, but they actually don't sting unless you're climbing a tree and you don't know the nest is there. Most of the time, these wasps provide pest control in our gardens, and we don't even know they're there until the leaves fall off the tree. But again, once winter comes, their colony comes to an end, and you just see the papery nest cell that is left. So bald-faced hornets and aerial yellow jackets, usually they look alarming, but not so bad. And then, of course, we have hundreds of solitary wasp species just doing their thing, hunting crickets, small caterpillars, and other insects, flies, spiders, day to day, and they don't bother us at all, but an amazing amount of biodiversity in our landscapes. Okay, let's talk about habitat. I get calls all the time at the extension office. I have this dead bug. What is it? I would encourage you to, before killing it, find out what it is. Take a picture, send it in, use the photo ID apps, and learn a little bit about more instead of kill and then ask questions, because while we do have pests in our landscape, most are actually not pests, and they're doing our thing as part of our garden ecosystems. And if you look closely, you'll start to notice a lot of different things. Like if you have an aphid infestation, count the amount of biodiversity, the number of species that you see feeding on those aphids. It's pretty incredible. Pollinators need food, shelter, water, and space. So instead of talking about specific plants, I want to talk about some characteristics that you can look for when attracting pollinators to your landscape. Diversity. Every plant has a different nutritional profile, so plant a wide variety of flowers for pollinators. Make sure you have blooms all season. Right now, the crocuses are blooming, a lot of our bulbs are blooming, all the way till the end of the season when rabbitbrush, goldenrod, insects need those late season blooming flowers. Avoid double flowers. We'll get to questions after. Okay, about double flowers. Who knows what a double flower is? Okay, few people. A double flower was a plant that was intentionally bred by horticulturalists to be big, bright, and beautiful. You get a flower that lasts all season long. The downside, though, is all the plant reproductive parts were bred out of the plant. So it is a sterile plant. It offers no resources to our any insect or animal. So you want to avoid those. And a lot of people, they love their double flowers. That's great. Keep them in your landscape, but maybe add some pollinator-friendly plants in addition to those double flowers. Roses, there's varieties that support pollinators. There are double flower varieties. Dahlias, there's hollyhocks. A lot of our common flowers have flowers that are double flower varieties and single flower varieties. If you're not sure, look inside the flower. Look for the pollen and nectar in those plant reproductive parts. Native plants are awesome for pollinators, especially for caterpillars too. It's caterpillars that turn, for our butterflies and moths, the caterpillar will only feed on those specific plants. So native plants really are a great option, but there's a lot of really great horticultural varieties as well. Ross talked about several of the plant select varieties. So when you're at the garden center, look and see where the bees are visiting. Look and see what's popular with the insects. There's so many great options out there. The QR code here takes you to a link. We call them pollinator syndromes. Different pollinators are attracted to different types of flowers. Bees are attracted to bright yellow, white, blue, or UV flowers. A lot of them are tubular, a lot of them have a landing platform for those bees. Hummingbirds are going to be attracted to red, long tubular flowers, or orange, and they have a long, usually a funnel-shaped, they're usually long and funnel-shaped. Butterflies are attracted to a wide variety of colorful flowers, and they usually visit flowers that have a landing pad or that have long spurs for their tongues to get that nectar. Moths and bats they're nocturnal pollinators, so they visit flowers that open up at night. There is a full chart, pollinator syndrome chart from the Pollinator Partnership at that link there. And you can use this as like guidelines to make sure you want to attract a wide variety of, for instance, make sure you have different colors and different shapes of flowers to attract different insects. Bees see differently. They see UV light, so flowers to look a lot different to them than they do to us. Like at the top there, that white flower is what the bee sees. That's like a bullseye. That flower is saying, come here, and there's lots of pollen and nectar here. And we want to think about flowers that attract all beneficial insects. Pollinators get up there, they're very charismatic. But once you start attracting pollinators, you're going to attract a lot of other beneficial insects that will help keep pests down. And so here's some of the major plant families that can attract that have a lot of nectar resources. Apiaceae, which is our carrot family. In that picture right there, that's moon carrot with some yellow masked bees that are very commonly seen in our backyard. Asteraceae, which is our sunflower family. Brassicaceae, mustards. Fabaceae, which is the pea family. And this is by no means an all-inclusive list. So this is just some broad categories to get you started. Moon carrot is a plant select variety. It's one of my favorites. I see so much biodiversity on this plant. These are all from, or mostly from my front yard, actually. And all of these wasps, flies, and bees, I mean, I get up there, I am all in their business, and I never get stung. These wasps truly do not care. They're there for the nectar resources. Grasses for insects. Pollinators need grasses. Yes, there's not, blooming flowers, but they rely on grasses for overwintering and shelter. And there's a lot of butterflies that rely on our native grasses. So the one pictured here relies exclusively on blue grama. So native grasses can be a beautiful addition to your landscape as an ornamental plant. So consider that when you're picking out your plant palette. Now, all the way, the green landscape on the end, that is the worst for pollinators. There's no resources there, but everything's about balance. So take a look at that middle photo. Notice, maybe they like their turf grass, but they're trying to add more pollinator-friendly flowers to the landscape. Think about balance. This photo on the right is certainly what we want to strive for, that messy plants touching each other. There's some sheltered area for those insects, and of course, a lot of flower resources. Bees need bare soil areas to nest, and we talked about their life cycle. So they won't cut through landscape fabric, they won't go through mulch, they just need bare soil. No tilling, just Colorado soil. A lot of our bees and other insects need cavity nesting areas. So if you cut down a tree, for instance, I know, I saw a lot of downed trees with this most recent windstorm and it breaks my heart. But if you can use some dead wood or dead logs and add them to your landscape, you can be artistic about it, you will certainly have insects that overwinter in those areas. Consider reducing lawn areas, and we're gonna have to think creatively too. So, parks, backyards, the side of the road, these little parts of our landscape that we're not actively using are great places for pollinator-friendly plants. And I've got to wrap up here, so I'm gonna fly through the last few slides here. Bee hotels are an awesome addition to the landscape. You can add a bee hotel without the risk of getting stung. But there are some best practices. It's not a no maintenance project. Michigan State University has a great fact sheet that talks about how to do a bee hotel so it'll benefit the bees the most. This is a great learning opportunity. If you see solitary wasp nest in your bee hotel, don't panic, take a picture and call me. But those solitary wasps coexist with the bees just fine, and they're not gonna sting you either. So it's a really cool way to observe their life cycle without the risk of getting stung. Butterflies and moths, look at those caterpillar host plants. A great website is actually butterfliesandmoths.org. You can search by species, you can search for your county checklist, and look at what plants those butterflies and moths need. Butterflies and moths and hummingbirds need layers. So you've got your small perennials, plant some bigger shrubs, and then make sure you have those larger trees too. They need sheltered areas from the rain, from the winds, yeah, they just need layers in the habitat. And of course, all pollinators need water. You'll see males in mud puddles a lot, getting those trace minerals from the mud. Here's some examples of caterpillar host plants. The pictures, I gotta point out, because that is a two-tailed swallowtail, caterpillar and adult butterfly. They host on ash trees and chokecherries. This is important because we're losing a lot of our ash trees due to emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is not in the Denver metro area. It's north of Denver, and we found it in a little place in Littleton last year. But with the loss of our ash trees, these butterflies are gonna need more chokecherries. So plant chokecherries. It's great for all pollinators. It'll feed these caterpillars, and the birds will love the berries as well. Here's some other examples of caterpillar host plants. Since our European paper wasps are eating all of our caterpillars, if you're into it, consider, if you find like monarch butterflies on milkweed, consider putting a cover on those to let those caterpillars feed until they make a cocoon, because I hear over and over and over, I saw the caterpillars and then 2 days later they were gone. The European paper wasp probably preyed on them. So that's always a good option if you're into that. Hummingbirds, same things, they need those layers and sheltered areas in the habitat. Hummingbird feeders, just like bird feeders, are mostly for human enjoyment. So certainly, keep your hummingbird feeders, but long term, those hummingbirds need insects. They can't rear young unless they can feed their babies insects. 70% of their diet is insects. So how do you help out the hummingbirds? Plant flowers that provide nectar for those insects. Weeds, pardon my weeds, I'm feeding the bees. I don't know about this. Depends on the weed species. Dandelions is the most common. Yes, you'll see pollinators feeding on dandelions, but no, it is not the most nutritious source, and research shows that they prefer other plants. So, okay, leaving the dandelion might not be the worst thing, but plant some pollinator-friendly plants that are more nutritious for those bees. Take it a step further. No mow May, don't do it, it's not a thing. If you wait a whole month to mow your lawn, it's gonna be really hard to mow for one, but also is not in the best interest of the health of your turf grass. And in Colorado, we don't have a lot of flowering plants in our lawns. So better yet, plant some flowers, strips along the sides of your lawn. Take some of that turf grass out and add more pollinator-friendly plants. There's better things you can do. Leaving the leaves, yes, that is a thing. Please leave your leaves. They're a great mulch. They provide sheltering areas for not only bumblebees, but a wide variety of other insects. So we all shared a lot of information tonight, and our goal is to arm you with as much information so you can make the best decisions. A couple things I want to point out before I wrap up. It's not all or nothing. Consider bite-sized pieces. You don't have to overhaul your whole entire landscape. For me, that's always very overwhelming to think about. So think about taking it off in bite-sized chunks. And think about what you want in your landscape. Maybe you're a birder and you want to attract more birds, or maybe you're really into butterflies and you want to plant some dill to get those black swallowtails. The options are absolutely endless. I love this idea. If you're brainstorming, go to Google Earth, print out your property, and map out what your goals are and what you want to do. And each year, take a chunk and complete another project. I think this is a great way to make it more manageable. And lastly, here's some steps to get started. I just want to point out a couple things. Soil improvements, get a soil test. Most low water native plants actually don't need a lot of amendments, so figure out what's in your soil. You may have to do less than you think. Get to know your landscape. Turn on your irrigation system and watch where the water goes. Watch how much sunlight certain areas of your landscape get. The more you can understand about your own landscape, the more you'll be able to pick out different plants and do different design ideas. Plant zones. From a pollinator perspective, planting groups in 3s or 5s is great because bees tend to visit flowers of the same species on one run, before honeybees go back to the hive. They'll visit plants of the same species. So consider groups of 3 or 5. Mulch is great for the landscape. It will keep moisture in your soil, but consider maybe some areas for some ground nesting bees. And then other areas where you need heavy weed suppression, add that mulch. There can be balance. And irrigation. So the biggest problem that I see when people call the extension office is, I ripped out all my turf, but now my tree is dying. So before you do anything, your tree, if you have a big, healthy tree, it was relying on all that irrigation from your turf grass. So before you make major changes, think about how you want to prioritize your irrigation. Because the trees will suffer. Trees in Colorado need supplemental water. There's just no way around that. But you can prioritize where you place your water. Protect those trees and rip out the grass elsewhere. So things to think about. And then lawns, think about where you're not using your lawn. If you have kids or dogs, maybe keep part of it, but think about the areas that you're not actively using your lawn. And that can be a great place to start to rip out that turf grass. Maintenance, be patient. All the plants aren't gonna live the first time around, but keep trying. Remember, plants need water to get established, so make sure you're watering those plants until they're established and then pull back how much you're providing water. All right, and this is just the beginning. Once you start building water-wise and pollinator landscapes, you're gonna see a lot of cool things. Have you all ever seen a baby ladybug? Yeah, that is a baby ladybug, a ferocious aphid eater, and the adults visit flowers and eat the pollen. So you'll start seeing these great processes. It's also a lacewing and a lacewing larva. Great pest control in our garden. That top photo is a milkweed beetle that you'll see if you plant milkweed. If you want to learn more about bees specifically, visit nativebeewatch.org. And this website here has a link to more resources. So we have the list of classes on water-wise landscapes, but there's a lot more on pollinators too at that link there. So thank you all so much. I know I flew through that information, but I appreciate your time.